who organized the first critical animal studies in Vassar College last year. So thank you, Rocky.
Hi, thank you all for being here. This is super exciting to see. I just wanted to say a few brief words before we get started this morning, and I'll be facilitating the first panel, so you'll hear me introducing folks in a few minutes. Just kind of following some conversations with people yesterday, just wanted to kind of bring up the idea of this space being one that people enter with many different experiences, many different backgrounds, and many different levels of familiarity with the different systems of oppression and I guess personal narratives that we're discussing in this space. So I understand that on Friday night, this space was introduced as one that we were trying to create as a safe space. And I guess just kind of following some of the events of yesterday, not to kind of target anything in particular, just want to talk about maybe shifting that to an accountable space or a safer space where we recognize that we're unable to really create a safe space for everyone without knowing where everyone is coming from. And so obviously due to time restraints in the conference and the nature of the work that we're dealing with and the theories and all of the academic stuff, there isn't really the full opportunity to address any like microaggressions that happen or anything that makes people uncomfortable, although we should be trying to do that as much as possible within this space. Also recognizing that people might not feel comfortable calling each other out if they feel that something someone said is harmful. So just kind of want to put that out there as we start today and to remind people to really try to be intentional with your words and really think about how word choice and use of examples and just kind of general things we're talking about today can affect different people. So cool. With that said, I'll be introducing our first speaker of the morning, Stephen Harned, who's the Canada Research Chair in Cognitive Science at UQuim. Excuse my inability to pronounce French-sounding things, and also a professor at McGill. So thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Je vais céder mes préférences esthétiques pour la langue française. Je vais parler l'anglais parce que c'est les besoins éthiques des animaux qui comptent ici, pas nos préférences esthétiques. Et l'envergure de l'anglais est indisputablement plus large. So I'm going to speak English. What I said was that I'm going to set aside my aesthetic preferences for the English language to speak in the for the French language to speak in the English language because it has a much wider reach and it's not my aesthetic preferences that matter here but the ethical needs of animals. I'm going to give a talk in which the web stream will only see my face for the first few sentences because there's going to be an image in the background that you all know. First, I want to congratulate and thank the organizers, Maud, Agatha, Christiane, Isaac, and Addison. You've done a wonderful and very important job. How important? I think the industrial scale, global scale agony that human beings are inflicting on non-human animals is the biggest moral problem and shame of our age. And I'm going to step aside for a second so that you have a graphic image of that shame. Not that one.
Allison. Good. Allison. I need to know when it's on the screen. I can't see. You have to tell me. When is it on the screen?
Okay, go ahead. A little more. Escape. There.
Okay.
No?
Yep. This is you've all seen it. This is the Occupy for Animals version of the kill counter. It's only partial. It's not displaying.
No, it's not.
Hold on. Why is it not displaying?
No.
Is there not a delay between?
Isaac?
Ah,
It's okay?
no, it's still.
Wow. Why is it
It's like a
pointing?
double screen. You know what? I think you have to drag it over to the side. I think it's. it needs
Like
to-
this?
double-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Like that? Oh,
That's
does that
it,
work?
okay.
Okay, let's
Okay.
start over. Okay, there we go.
Okay, thank you. You all know this counter. We all know this counter. It's not for us, but it's important, and I like it to be ticking in the background for what it is that I'm going to say. Most of what I'm about to say is not really for the participants in this conference. Most of you are already vegan and active in trying to solve this problem. You know all of this. But maybe it will help you a little in marshalling your thoughts and working to get the rest of the world to open their eyes and their hearts. Because in the end, I think the only hope for animals is a direct appeal to humans' hearts. Not all humans have hearts. There are sadists, sociopaths, and people with hearts that are impenetrably hardened for an entire lifetime. We are not addressing ourselves to sadists, sociopaths, and the hard-hearted. We'll leave them for later. That only leads to conflict and anger if we address them. It doesn't help the animals who are suffering every instant on that kill counter. And time matters, not to us, but to them. I urge you to remember always that time matters. Every instant we fail, and we're still all failing, means mounting agony for helpless, innocent animals. We have heard already that by 2050, at this rate, the kill counter's total will be twice as high. That's just arithmetic. The weak-hearted will feel the urge to throw up their hands and say it's hopeless. We're just too small, and it, meaning the rest of carnivorous, fur-wearing, milk-drinking, puppy-milling, animal experimenting, and hunting humanity is just too big. And that is even after we have set aside the minority sadists, sociopaths, and impenetrably hard-hearted, and just address ourselves to the majority, I hope, that's left. No, the only hope for animals is if that huge majority of humanity, whose hearts are not yet impenetrably hardened, can be reached. If we can manage to win their hearts by opening their hearts to the enormity, the monstrosity of animal suffering imposed by us, and to the fact that this suffering is not necessary in any way, not for our survival, not for our health. That's two huge things, communicating the enormity of animal suffering and its utter needlessness, its gratuitousness. Because this vast majority of people who still have hearts do not know either of these things. Remind yourselves of that. We're preaching to the converted over here. We know this, we've seen these images. They haven't. They do not know how cruelly and on what a scale animals are suffering. And they are completely unaware of the fact that enormous suffering is completely unnecessary. These two basic facts for us, which we all know, they don't. They think that we need to breed, use, and kill animals for our own survival and health. They think that's a law of nature. And they think that what we are doing to animals, because we need to do it, we are doing in the most humane way possible. In fact, much more humanely than our ancestors did in caveman days, or than animals do to one another. They think that. And this potentially reachable majority is kept in the darkness of these two huge false beliefs, necessity and humaneness, by a global conspiracy of interests, industrial, and personal that are profiting from keeping the majority ignorant. I want to stress that this global conspiracy is not human. It does not have a heart. It is collective and corporate. And as that excellent Canadian film a few years ago, The Corporation, showed so graphically, corporations are not human beings. And their behavior best fits the description of a psychopath. We need to address our appeal to humans with hearts. They are the only hope for animals. We cannot change the industries that have evolved to exploit animals on the monstrous scale that they're doing it today unless we change the hearts of the individual human beings that constitute the majority that is sustaining these psychopathic industries. We have to make these industries unsustainable. But winning the hearts of their consumers so they realize that, but by winning the hearts of their consumers so that they realize that laws have to be changed collectively, globally, so as to put an end to the needless, heartless exploitation of non-human animals. We're in the web era. PETA and others have provided us with graphic evidence many times over of the horrors that the majority of people do not know about. Domestic pet breeding is also an abominable industry, but one of its immediate effects is that most people have formed bonds with non-human animals. I do not believe it is humanly possible, and I'm glad that we showed the last speaker's cats before we showed the kill counter. I do not believe that it is humanly possible to love a family animal and look at the atrocities that are being committed to other animals just like their own loved ones. I don't know about the rest of you, but whenever I come back from seeing something horrible, whenever I've looked at my annual petition, my daily petition page, and I click on all the petitions that I sign, and I see these horrible images, which I try to scrunch my eyes so I don't see, because we vegans don't need to see these things, we've already seen them. I always think of Sindri, my cat, because there's no difference between these creatures that we're doing these horrible things with and our own loved animals. People will try to look away because it hurts to see such things, but they must be shown these things kindly but relentlessly. By whom? By us. We're not the ones who need to keep viewing these horrors. They've already had their effect on our hearts. Our mission is to open the eyes and thereby the hearts of everyone else on the planet in that majority. I want to just give a few caveats before I close. There are some themes that have come up in this conference which I think are worthy and right, but out of order. And when I talk about order, I keep thinking about the kill counter. That's the first priority, to bring that down and out. Other things that look as if they're looming large have to be set aside. Quarreling with sociopaths and sadists isn't helping anybody. What's the name of the Israeli activist, Gary? Yeah. He's wonderful, but I don't agree strategically with him because he gets into conflicts with people. And we're not trying to harden people's hearts, we're trying to soften them and win them. That's not a priority, and it's not helping animals to get angry and to make people angry back at you. I don't know how many times I've heard a hunter, an animal owner, when he's confronted by indignant vegans, say, I can do whatever I fucking well want to do with my animals, and they go home and they do something bad to their animals just by way of vengeance because of this provocation. Go away from the sadists and the psychopaths. Leave them for later when the rest of humanity has already discovered its heart and made laws to protect animals. Then what they do becomes illegal. Right now it's not illegal. And getting into a violent conflict with them doesn't help anybody, and it doesn't assuage, it may assuage your conscience, but it doesn't help the animals in the kill counter. And then the last message I want to say, and this one may be even more surprising to some of you, is I participated in a panel about medical research. And of course, I'm 100% abolitionist, and I want to put an end to all of it, everything, eating them, wearing them, experimenting with them. But it can't be done all at once. And some of the, just as you have to set the sociopaths aside, you have to set aside the targets that are not to which the two principles I gave you are not applicable. The exploitation of animals is neither necessary for our survival or our health, nor is it humane. Medical research has to be the last one to leave the room and close the door behind it. We have to put an end to the stuff that is clearly unnecessary and inhumane. The medical industry, for what it's worth, is regulated, badly regulated, but there's some regulation. The laboratory rats, before they do horrible things with them in the end, are treated infinitely better than the animals that are bred for slaughter, than the dogs that are skinned alive. And still, I was toying with the idea of showing the most poignant photograph I've seen at all, but I just can't bring myself to do it, of a Chinese dog that is alive, and its skin has been removed, and it's in a state of stark terror, its eyes still open, waiting 10 minutes to die. This kind of stuff is the first priority. And this kind of stuff can be defended with the principle that it's completely unnecessary for our survival and our health. You can't use that principle with medical research, no matter how you bend yourself into a pretzel to try to do it. It's not true. Some medical research really is saving human lives. So leave that for later. Put that into context. With that, I'm just happy to announce that the last talk in this particular panel is going to be almost a direct follow-up to what it is that I said to you now. Thank you.
Now we'll take about 5 minutes of questions.
Go ahead.
My name is Steve. I'm from Israel. I'm a medical doctor and geneticist, and I want to comment about your last comment about animal research. I'm not sure we should decide what we put first and what we put last. I mean, I think we can do things at the same time. In the lab I was working in Israel, now I'm working here at NNI. In the lab I was working in Israel, we completely stopped experimenting with animals. Not because I turned the hearts of people, but because we all understood that it's not the right scientific thing to do. And I think in this aspect, there's a lot
I completely agree. Scientific arguments against animal experimentation should go on. They have nothing to do with this. They're not, as you said, it's not an appeal to people's hearts. It's an appeal to people's minds, of course. I'm talking about the militant opposition to animal experimentation under any circumstance. Yeah, I agree with you completely. And you'll see that the last speaker will be speaking about some wonderful, successful outcomes in Israel. Okay, I had no idea.
I'd like to add something as well. In the next 5 years, we will see a significant decrease in experimentation, animal experimentation. They've recently developed organs that on a chip, the electrodes that simulate organellia arthropathies, and there'll be much.
Fine, but let me tell you that the proportion of this that accounts for is minuscule. This is the monster. Don't pin your hopes on alternate medical research to solve this problem. Yes. Oui, je vous en prie. Parlez un petit peu plus fort.
Je voulais juste savoir si vous aviez des exemples d'outils qu'on pourrait utiliser pour sensibiliser autour de
Vous n'avez que passer sur Google Images pour voir ce qu'il y a comme outil. Il y a plein d'horreurs qu'on peut montrer. Et l'autre côté, c'est Élise qui va donner la référence pour cet article où des diététiciens, n'est-ce pas? Oui. Oui, voilà. Donc il y a des preuves et nous sommes des preuves, ça il faut que vous sachiez, nous sommes des preuves, nous autres les véganes, que c'est possible d'être en bonne survivre et d'être en bonne santé malgré ça. Donc les deux principes qui sont nos accomplis, c'est le principe que c'est pas nocif à la santé, au contraire, et le fait que les horreurs, il n'y a pas de humane farming, etc. Ce qu'on fait est abominable, quoi que ça soit, et les images pour ça, les images dynamiques et statiques sont disponibles partout. Il ne faut pas s'asseoir. You mustn't sit at a dinner conversation and smile embarrassedly and chuckle when somebody makes jokes or light of what it is that you're doing. The other thing that's important that I forgot to mention is we're often accused, vegans are often accused of acting or feeling or being superior. Nothing of the sort, and you have to be sure that you don't play into that. We are not morally superior. We're not morally superior in any way. Our hope, our profound hope, is that we're not morally superior. Because if we are morally superior, the animals are lost. We're the same as everyone else. The only thing that separates us from everyone else is the information that we know and they don't know. And therefore it's this information that it's not necessary to do these horrible things, and that these horrible things really are horrible, has to be communicated to them. Wait.
I was just wondering, when you say that non-human animals are the priority.
Who said non-human animals are a priority?
I think you said that earlier in the presentation.
Pardon me, I'm not saying that they're priority over human beings. I'm just saying that in the ethical, are you asking about that? The first sentence that I said, the ethical problem, why is this the biggest ethical problem is facing us? Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah, I thought I had heard that you said that animals were the priority, or like the kill counter, that's the priority, that's what we should.
Oh yeah, sorry. It's over, for example, convincing the sociopaths or fixing medical research. Medical research will come later, and sociopaths will come even later. This is the priority. Meat, fish, fur, dairy, etc. That's what But there is another sense of priority that was latent in what I said, which is, why is this the biggest moral problem of our age? There are people starving. There are people. Every single abomination that we do to animals is also being done to humans. That's all true. What's different, and it's not just the numbers that are different. The numbers are, of course, grotesquely different. You heard it at the beginning of this conference, that the number of people we've killed in the entire, and tortured, in the entire history of humanity has been topped easily in a few weeks of this stuff. But the other reason this has priority is because the wrongs that we do to other humans, which are every bit as abominable as what we do to animals, are A, illegal, planet-wide, and B, most people hold to those laws. Most people think it's wrong to do these things. When we do the same horrors in incomparably greater numbers to animals, it's not illegal, and most people don't hold it to be wrong. Most people don't even know about it. The others have said this as well. I told you I'm not saying anything new to you. The supposition is that if we can get people to open their hearts to this, then their hearts are going to be also more susceptible to the remaining wrongs that we're doing to human beings. Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce our next speaker this morning. Elinor Lloyd is a PhD sociology student at the University of Warwick. She gained her undergraduate degree in law from the University of Sussex before pursuing an MA in child studies at King's College, London, where she stumbled across an article on the co-occurrence of abuse within the home. This was the subject of her MA dissertation, and she is now pursuing a more in-depth analysis of the topic at a doctoral level. Okay, thank you. What have I pressed?
Hi, it's really great to be here. I wanted to thank everyone who's been involved in arranging the conference. I've learned a lot over the last couple of days, And I saw my first snowplow this morning, which was really exciting for me, because we don't really have this kind of weather in the UK. So I'm going to jump right in, I think. So my area of research is focusing on child and non-human animal relationships in violent homes. So I'm going to start off with a bit of a brief overview of the companion animal status in the UK, of how many animals that we keep. It's okay. So I know that the terms companion animals and pets, I want to acknowledge that those are problematic terminology to use, and they're socially constructed. So obviously varies greatly which animals get included and which ones don't. But I'm going to stick to them today because a lot of the research that has been done on a practical kind of note does use those in terms of statistics.
You say great things, but they can't hear you at the back. Would you put on the mic?
Yeah?
Awesome.
Has nobody heard about the snowplow?
No, so you might want to go back on.
Okay. Okay, yeah. So I wanted to thank everyone who arranged the conference for being here today. I've learned so much over the last couple of days, and I saw a snowplow this morning, which was a new experience for me, because we don't have them. So I was going to jump in straight away and talk about my research, which is about child and non-human animal relationships in violent homes. So I have got some statistics on companion animals and pets in the UK. So I know that they're problematic terms to use, but it is on a practical level, it's quite handy to have to stick to the sort of same terminology as that I've got the statistics for, because that's how they've decided to define them. And also they are these kind of species that you see, so fish, dogs, cats, rabbits, and others that we usually keep as companion animals, are the kind of animals that humans have the most contact with. So when you're talking about sort of animals within the home, non-human animals in the home, these are the species we're going to be talking about. So 91% of American pet owners consider their pet to be a member of the family. So I know over the last couple of days we've learned a lot about the huge number of animals that are killed in shelters across the world, because nobody apparently wants them. But if I want us to put that aside for one moment and to look at kind of the ideal family setup and what people would say about their companions. So this is what pets are in an ideal world. They are companions, they're family, they're kin. They don't judge us, they are supportive, they're perceptive of our needs and our emotions. They give us an embodied intimacy that perhaps we can't have so much with other humans. They're affectionate, we can tell them anything we want to, and they keep our secrets. But obviously what we have to bear in mind is that there is always going to be that fundamental master-servant relationship, and that non-humans are viewed as being subordinate to humans, and that obviously leaves them vulnerable to kind of different abuse. So they're valued really on an emotional level, but the social status, so like I said, kin, family for lots of people, but they are also, at the end of the day, property. They're an economic asset to other people as well. They can be seen as disposable, like we've been talking about the shelters, and also they are food to other people as well. So the legal status kind of reflects that, so whether it's the social reflecting the legal or vice versa, again they're seen as property. They're offered different levels of protection, so usually depending on how valuable they are to humans and what their use is to humans. And there's also a lack of enforcement or punishment when there are crimes committed against them, when they are abused. So a lot of this results in their historical status as property and their economic dependence on humans. They live with us, we give them food, so they have to rely on that. And to me, this is where I see the abuse of non-human animals intersecting with other kinds of patriarchal oppression systems. So with the historical status of obviously of women, children, slaves as being oppressed and being property. And to me, this is how it all ties in to my research. So what do I mean by co-occurrence is where there's an overlap between animal abuse, child abuse, and domestic abuse within the same home. So you can also include elder abuse in that. It's very similar kind of dynamics, same kind of oppressive structures that enforce that. But to be honest, I think it's complicated enough just looking at the animals and the domestic abuse and the children for now. Maybe I'll include the elders later for my next research. So, as Karen Adams says, so the kind of dynamics that she looked at was forcing her to neglect or abuse the animal, or forcing her to force the children to abuse or neglect the animals, or forcing her to neglect her children, exist within the same kind of continuum of coercive control. But I want to add to that as well and recognise how the different kinds of abuse affect everyone that's involved in the same home. So in the United Kingdom, witnessing harm to another is actually counted as child abuse. So where there's domestic violence going on, that is child abuse. And I also want to include non-humans in that, and the fact that if they're witnessing abuse of other humans in the home, whether that's children or adults, then also they're going to find that traumatic, and it's going to be a difficult experience for them. So the abuse of others in the home will constitute emotional abuse. You can have problems of insecure attachment with children when the adults in their lives are unable to give them that kind of caregiving that they need. There's also developmental problems for children, and for all of them there could be sort of behavioural problems, depression and anxiety. There's also evidence that suggests that usually women in domestic violence situations will delay leaving a violent situation because, like we discussed yesterday, there is a problem of not having spaces in domestic abuse refuges for non-human animals. So options are generally finding friends or family to take in the non-human while they're in the shelter. But the problem with that is that sometimes part of this whole system of oppression is that they are isolated from their community and their family and their friends, and they won't have anyone to help them. So the other option is just to leave the pet with the violent perpetrator, which obviously leaves the animal at risk. But while they're delaying, they're also leaving themselves and children at increased risk of abuse while they're there. So domestic abuse in the UK, just some statistics. I don't like shouting numbers at people, but just to give you an idea, so 1.2 million women and 800,000 men in 2011 to 12 reported having experienced domestic abuse. So every minute in the UK, the police receive a call about domestic violence, every minute. But then new statistics were released, I think, on Wednesday or Thursday, which is actually kind of annoying. I think the figure's gone up, it's about one call every 30 seconds now. So 750,000 children a year witness domestic violence. So as we've learnt already, that's child abuse in the UK. And in 75 to 90% of incidents of domestic violence, children are in the same or the next room. Now you might notice non-human animals are really absent from all this information. We don't know what their experiences are. Probably with their enhanced senses, the enhanced sense of smell and the hearing, that they probably would suffer as much, if not more, than children who are seeing the violence or witnessing the violence as well. Children are also at greater risk of physical abuse where there's domestic violence, so anywhere between 30% to 66% depending upon the study that you look at. So the existing research, so there's great variation in the different kind of figures that they've come up with. Most of this research has been done with women in domestic abuse shelters, so there's a lot to be said about the kind of sample there, but having said that, how else are you going to identify people who have been through domestic abuse? So some of the estimates are really small. So 21% of cases where the animals were threatened in Flynn 2000, but anywhere up to 71% where the animal was threatened. They've been harmed or actually killed in about half of domestic abuse cases, and lots of variation as well where women have delayed leaving. So again, up to almost half in Nielsen in 2004. Where they've delayed leaving a violent situation because they didn't have anywhere to put their non-human companion. So, like I said, most of the existing research is done on women in domestic violence shelters. It's also based on small sample sizes, which again is problematic. And there have been very few studies conducted in the United Kingdom. So this is more about sort of where I'm coming from. So the Home Office, they have discussed it in Parliament, but they've decided they want quantitative data that's actually from the UK, before they decide whether they should include animals in this kind of whole protective sphere of child abuse and domestic abuse. But the problem obviously is how do we define animal abuse? And also, from my perspective, how do you explain it to children? We already know how contradictory our attitudes towards non-humans are. So I've got some kind of obvious examples that I picked out. So Free Willy. We all want Willy to be free. We all want him to go back to his family in the wild. So why then do we also want to see him perform tricks for us? Madagascar, they're wild animals. They might be a bit scared of the wild, but do we still want to see them in cages though? And these are the kind of places that, things that children watch and the places where you take children. Chicken Run, again, you want them to escape from the mean people. or do you want to eat them? Rabbits, lovely, let's have a cuddle, or should we shoot them? And the same with puppies, we could just turn them into coats, great. And pigs, which I think they have an extra bad kind of experience really out of it, because Babe obviously really intelligent, we know that pigs are intelligent, but are they actually dirty animals who roll around in the mud, which is how they're portrayed a lot? Or are they actually food? And this one I think is specifically aimed at children. And then all these other animals who, they can talk, they wear clothes, so what are children supposed to make of it? How do they make sense of everything? So on a more practical note, in terms of discussing what animal abuse is, I wanted to pull up this research, which is by vets in the UK. They just did the one study and they managed to get 4 articles out of it. So they wanted to talk to veterinary practitioners about experiences of non-accidental injury. So that's really significant, I think, because non-accidental injury is usually associated with children and not animals, but they decided to adapt the terminology and apply it to non-humans as well. So 91% of the respondents acknowledged the existence of non-accidental injury in non-human animals, and 48% thought they had seen or suspected cases. So those cases involved dogs, cats, horses, hamsters, and rabbits, so a wide variety of animals. And in 19 cases, the participants said that violence in the home was a factor which made them suspicious that the companion animal had been hurt on purpose. There wasn't really much scope to kind of say how they thought they knew that there was violence in the home, but I think it's really interesting that they've raised the point anyway. In the articles, so they wrote one on the features that raise suspicion, one on the types of physical injury, and one on sexual abuse. And the last one, on Munchausen by proxy, was really interesting because, again, that's usually only seen in children, the children being the proxies. But the vets had apparently seen this in the news or read books or seen programs about it on television, and they'd adapted that themselves to apply to non-human animals. So what about domestic abuse cases where there are children and non-human animals? So we already know that women might sometimes delay leaving the violent situation because of concern for pets, which leave themselves and the children at risk. And also, what about children? Would they actually be willing to leave their pets with a violent person and know that they're not there to protect them? My kind of hypothesis is that the violence can affect relationships with pets in different ways, depending on the child, depending on the different stresses that are affecting the child. So I've just gone for basic language here. So the normal relationship, which would be the same as in a non-violent household, kind of a normal relationship between child and pet. There's also the strong relationship where I think maybe they have an extra close bond, they've been through a lot together. Okay. And so they have that extra strong bond where they support each other. There's also a dominant relationship where the child might act out their own kind of abuse on the animal. They might not understand how to cope with it themselves and they don't have any other outlet to kind of deal with it. So quickly, my research is going to be based on doing interviews with children. So I've got 40 urban interviews in Swansea, which is just down the road from where I live. 40 rural samples. Those are going to be my presumed non-abused sample from schools. So there's going to be 80 children in those samples. I'm doing 15 participant observations. So those are children under 5 that have been targeted because they've displayed problem behaviours towards children. Towards animals, sorry, and other children sometimes. So in order to find out what their motivations are and what's behind it. Pause for Kids is a charity that works with women, children and non-human animals and offers fostering for non-human animals for women escaping domestic abuse. They're going to help me arrange interviews with children who've been through a domestic violence situation as well to talk about their animals. And I'm hoping to get the RSPCA on board with their youth offending programme, so for youths who have abused animals. So I can do some interviews with them as well and find out what their motivations were, and just to find out how they feel about animals now that they've gone through the whole youth offending rehabilitation process. So Pause for Kids, their total since they launched in 1999, they're the only charity I know of in the UK that really do this and help all the victims, which I think is really important. So total non-humans helped 1,550 fostered, and there's everything from cats and dogs down to cockroaches down there, so quite a variety. Oh, this is an important bit. I know that's really small, you can't really see it, so maybe I'll just skip past that one. But this is just to show that I've done some requests to the police forces in England and Wales. There's 43 police forces, and only 8 could help me with these requests, which are about the number of domestic abuse incidents that they attended in 2012, the number of domestic abuse crimes, and the number of incidents and crimes with children, incidents and crimes where children were actually at risk, incidents and crimes of their pets, and incidents and crimes of their pets and children. So lots of them are actually rejected on the grounds of cost. There is a cost limit with freedom of information requests. But Devon and Cornwall Police have managed to send me their 26,000 records that they have, all anonymised, and I will be doing some statistics with them when I get my head round how to use SPSS. They use the Domestic Abuse, Stalking and Honour-Based Risk Identification Checklist, or DASH for short, which is made up of 27 questions, including question number 22, which is about mistreating the animal or the family pet. So other questions include questions about whether the perpetrator has tried to strangle or choke or suffocate the victim or the person who's answering the questions, whether there's been any sexual assault, use of weapons, whether they're feeling depressed, whether there's been any harm to children, kind of stalking or harassment behaviours. So it's not an ideal kind of sample. I don't have any demographic data. I don't even know the age or the gender of the people who are responding to the questions. All I have is their yes or no answers. But based on the answers that I do have, what I'm hoping to do is kind of what Simmons and Lehman did in 2007, and to identify patterns of abuse, and to find out whether there's any relationship between animal abuse and other risk indicators. So they suggested that individuals who abuse the family pet use more forms of aggressive violence and demonstrate greater use of controlling behaviours than those who do not. So hopefully, based on my yes/no answers, I'll be able to filter that out and find out whether there is a pattern. So they also found that men who abuse the family pet, because their sample was based on women, are more likely to demonstrate sexual violence, marital rape, emotional violence, and stalking. So I've managed to get to my summary. So other countries, notably America and Australia, New Zealand as well sometimes, they make use of the fact that there is co-occurrence to get people to cross-report their concerns. We don't do that at all in the UK. It doesn't even officially recognise that there is a relationship between different types of violence. But if you speak to professionals who are out in the field, they will quite often tell you that they've seen it or suspected it. But then, again, I think it's because there's no official kind of methods to cross-communicate, it's difficult for them to know how to report and who to report to. So my research aims, I might come back in a few years and tell you what I found out, but the aims are to identify the correlations between different types of maltreatment, so like I was saying with Simmons and Lehman, and to clarify whether there is a need for interagency cooperation, so that we can help all the victims and bring the animals to the forefront of that as well, and not just focus on the children and the women like has been done so far. So that's about it. I do have lots of references if anyone wants me to send them slides, so you've got all the references there. Any questions? The USA definitely does, but then again I think it varies from state by state. There are some things like in the United Kingdom they were going to set up cross-reporting between the councils in London and the RSPCA, but I don't think they ever got officially signed off on that. Similar with New Zealand, their sort of Society of the Protection of Animals, they cross-report as well, and Australia I think are quite advanced as well, yeah. Hi.
Yeah, I want to thank you, for the work you're doing. I think it's really important that we see work like this because we've had some really theoretical papers at this conference, but I think seeing something like your applied, I think it's so essential to critical animal studies because we talk about how oppressions are linked, and you're doing this, and I think it's really interesting how you intersect the office talk from yesterday, and I mean, it seems you're coming at it from a bit, you see these as more linked perhaps,
yeah.
And you referenced Carol Adams, so perhaps linked to patriarchy.
Yeah.
And you talk a bit about media, and I'm wondering if maybe, some of the things you show, Chicken Run from like Wallace and Gromit, and the one with the fox, I never saw that, but he's wearing clothes.
Yeah.
Do you think that, and I mean, Amber Jordan kind of talks about this in the Eco-Ability book with Dumbo and Finding Nemo. Do you think maybe that these films have some othering quality for animals, and I mean, especially with the deployment of disability in Finding Nemo and Dumbo, that it exoticizes these animal experiences even though they are anthropomorphized and teaches kids to think of animals as different?
I have to admit, to be honest, this isn't an area that I know anything about. I just kind of picked some examples out there that came to me immediately in the fact that it's really contradictory because, like especially with sort of Free Willy, it shows him in a captive environment where you want him to be free, but then again we want to go and see him in captivity, so how do you win? So I don't really know anything about it, but I do think it must be very confusing for children to know how to interpret these and to feel a bit conflicted, which might be good for us because maybe we can convert them. But yeah, so I don't really know enough to answer the question. Sorry. Yeah?
How would you extend your analysis to developing countries where the relationship to domesticated animals is indeed very different, but the use is certainly widespread?
Yes, definitely, yeah. I think I'd like to focus on the UK for now because I feel like it's something that could actually make a difference. But if I could save the world, I will. Hi.
I just want to say that I really love that you're using quantitative approaches on this. I was
Yeah.
wondering what form your data that you're going to be analyzing.
My police data, it's in an Excel spreadsheet at the moment. I'm trying to convert it over to SPSS. But a lot of the answers that are given, where people have refused answers, I've just got kind of dashes going all across. So I have to kind of sift through those. But it'll be good because I know when the police have got there, that they have tried asking the questions, and I'll be able to tell how many people have just refused to answer them. But there's also cases where the police have been really thorough and they've questioned more than one person about the same incident. So then for those, I have to sort through them because I've got yes, yes, no, no, and then I have to separate them out in the Excel before I can get them into SPSS. So I'm hoping there'll be lots of like pretty graphs and stuff at the end, but at the moment I'm really not getting my head around it. Hi. I don't really have any experience of working directly with children or anything. The people I'm going to be working with for my participant observation, though, they're pretty much a one-of-a-kind agency, I think. They're a really small company, so it's a mixture of council workers and NHS, National Health Service workers. And they take in, so they do five children, and they do 3 groups a year, and it runs for like 12 weeks sessions. And they just do like the basic kind of interventions with them. So I think teaching them about how it's important to be empathetic towards animals, why you should treat them kindly because you can hurt them, and because they're such young children, I think you have to start with the basics. And then I think they kind of get a little toy animal that they have to take care of then while they're there in the sessions. So just to kind of teach them, I suppose, what they might not be getting at home on the empathy side if they don't live with non-human animals or they just don't understand it properly. So I don't know of any brilliant examples, but hopefully, I think they seem to have quite a lot of success with that programme. Sorry? It's the Nurture Group. It doesn't have a website or anything. It's based in Brighton in the UK. Brighton and Hove Council run it, I think so. Okay. Any more questions? No?
Thank you.
Next up we have Marion, an animal liberationist who combines grassroots activism with her academic work as PhD student of Jewish animal ethics and cultural critique at Concordia University. She's also the co-founder of CARA, Quebec's Animal Rights Association, and her current project is the upcoming march to close all slaughterhouses in Montreal in June.
Hello everyone, I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much. Oh yeah.
That's correct.
Yeah. I apologize right off the bat that the abstract does not really reflect what I'm talking about today. The theme will be the problematization of culture, the culture concept, but I'd like to zoom in on the Quebec situation because this is the experience I'm drawing from as an activist. So the title is Quebec Culturalism, where xenophobia meets speciesism. So today I would like to share and discuss with you my concern about the ways in which the term culture is used in Quebec public discourse, media, and party politics. Culture is a politically loaded term, and I believe in our context it is an ideology which draws conservative boundaries between humans with negative consequences for non-humans. And today I want to focus on the exclusion on the human side of religious minorities, Jews and Muslims, and vegan animal rights activists that are excluded from the category desirable Quebecer. In my opinion, this amounts to a form of culturalism that in the context of globalization is defined by anthropologist Salins as the claim to own one's own mode of existence in opposition to a foreign imperial presence, or I would put it a little differently, a cultural claim opposing any alien presence, both real and imagined, to show who is in and who is out. In this context, I understand non-humans as not only economic casualties, as victims of human greed, but also as cultural casualties in the sense that the culture paradigm interlocks and actually undergirds other symbolic and tangible systems of oppression, as we have discussed in this conference. Of course, culture can change, it does change, and culture is perpetually contested, both on the in and on the outside of a particular group. But by those who claim the power to define what Quebec culture is, and of course there's a struggle over this needs to be emphasized, it is portrayed as of inherent value and as a given. It frames continuity, tradition, meaning, identity. These terms are all mixed together and they're never really justified in discourse. And of course, it is normative, telling people how to think, feel, and behave toward the perceived other. Yes, culture can be a very legitimate analytical tool, and we saw that yesterday, in my opinion, in the lecture on Donovan's dialogization. I found that very helpful. But there are political contexts where I believe it is worthwhile to challenge the culture concept both in and outside the academy to destabilize the oppressive paradigm on that front as well, especially when culture is sacralized and then used to justify the way things are going, justified almost on a metaphysical level, reminding us of a religious claim. One contributing factor to this problematic, of course, is economic, the commodification of culture. Cultural capital is what sells in global tourism of a prepackaged experience and of spectacle. We have taxidermy restaurants, hunting trips. The Canada Goose label we've been trying to fight so desperately this winter. This label being sold to France and Japan as the quintessential label of the wild Northwest. Relevant also in this context is the framing of the Quebec countryside as patrimoine rural, or rural heritage, that you can tap into through agritourism, for example, selling the pastoral idyll. So, and into this framework of the patrimoine rural, there are all kinds of different ways of being or possibilities of being in the country. It's all mixed up together. There's no ethical, there's no differentiation in it. And my argument is that it's being sold as a commodity. Now, within the structural logic of capitalism, the cultural project is the selling of the pseudo-old, the tradition, as a new experience that can be stored and shared on Facebook, that makes you look interesting. You can tell yourself and others you experience something new. Sure, culture can be perceived as outdated, but with the help of marketing experts, we saw that with the phenomenon of fur trim, for example, it was seen as outdated at some point. It ultimately will be refashioned, recycled via the retro label, for example, and then the irony of it all makes the outdated cool again. Now, the second dimension is culture as identity, and I'm drawing from anthropologist Martin Channock, who observes that it represents permanence, stability, and temporal depth. But at the same time, it seems to be displacing other primarily labels like race, class, and gender, and specifically in our context, nationality, it seems. Local responses to globalization include the construction of new traditions, imbuing the status quo with a new glow of new attractiveness and meaning. And here I was looking at the phenomenon of Western and country festivals that have been popping up everywhere in Quebec the last 35 years. The Festival of the Pig, for example, la Fête du Cochon, as a new kind of tradition, constructed idea. And what is interesting, in my opinion, is that this phenomenon has been happening at the same time the high-tech factory farm took over family estates in Quebec and severely challenged the self-understanding of the rural population and our relationship to food production overall, of course. And I found a long list of so-called festivals. And another example that I found also interesting was the rediscovery or discovery of rodeo. So, for example, last year, the factory farm municipality of Alexandria, not far from here, had their first rodeo. And I find that interesting because this is just a few kilometers away from two very important farmed animal sanctuaries, Tija and R&R, that, needless to say, clearly disrupt the identities of their neighbors in this region, who are factory farmers. And there has been quite some hostility in the sense of, you don't belong here. Another example I found really interesting was the Fête Agricole in Montreal, sponsored in large part by the city, and calling it an open door that happens every year. And this has started started a few years ago, where they bring those cute little piglets for children to pet and pose with. And then all weekend, this family-friendly event bombards families with the same message over and over again to consume more and more animal products. And I think this is no accident that these constructed traditions just started a few years ago. And I consider these cultural events or spectacles as a pushback to increasingly widespread critiques of agribusiness. Such forms of construction of culture seem to reveal a desperate urge to proclaim a distinct identity as protection against increasing globalization and thus functioning as a variant of identity politics. And here I'm drawing from Morny Joy's work, excuse me. In other words, animal users do not only want to use animals, they want to feel good doing it, and they want to think that they're not alone, that this is normal. But they are being increasingly challenged, and of course critics must be somehow neutralized, so they're being framed as cultural outsiders, perhaps as unpatriotic and harmful to society. As post-colonial theorists have already critiqued, culture appears to provide a bulwark of conservative resistance against any change. Despite the appeal to authenticity of rural Quebec, of a rural heritage, it is not only a category that throws all kinds of different ways of being in one category of commodification and identification. I mentioned that. It is, I repeat, a manufactured undertaking. It's an invention of tradition and the imagining of ideal communities, and this is a category we use a lot in religion studies. This ideal community is imagined as based on complete and total consensus about how other animals should be treated, and this for all eternity. In addition, this imagined community of animal users is construed as having a more valid view of the world as a whole, such as human exceptionalism as metaphysical truth, and thus unchangeable, of course. Further, the culture concept is often used, and here I make a global connection again, to erase subaltern histories, and here I'm drawing from it's very difficult to pronounce, a Haitian post-colonial historian. His name is Michel Ralph Trujillo. I hope I got that right. Thus it may contribute, by subaltern histories is meant, that this may contribute to the silencing of dissent, relegating ethical vegans, animal liberations as other, not from here, not part of the community, so they don't know what's going on here. They're alien. But what are these factory farmers actually trying to reclaim? And of course this is a totalizing statement, but it's a model I'm trying to explain. For example, I was watching this NFB documentary on the Western, on Western culture, and this rodeo champion there literally says, and I quote, "Moi, je suis la tradition à la lettre." I'm following tradition to the letter. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, did he not a few seconds ago said that he likes McDonald's? What tradition is he talking about? Psychologists of globalization call this a bicultural identity, not hybrid, bicultural, I'd like to emphasize. Combining a local identity with a global culture in very selective ways, very flexible, because identity confusion is simply not tolerated. It's very difficult to tolerate. So for the sake of protection of identity or faith, one's notion of what is tradition easily incorporates modern practices, including technology, whatever actually is convenient, and fast food, while holding on to old, persistent ways of exploiting animals as well, including rediscovering old ways of exploiting animals. Needless to say, this construction of identity is full of paradox and tension. And I wonder whether ethical deliberation comes in these processes. I really think psychologists that focus on this phenomenon of globalization would do well focusing on this aspect too. For many, it seems that there's, of course, negative developments, those that feel threatened by globalization for conservative or particular reasons, that Shattered the Family Farm has produced the same process of modernization in the new threatening paradigm, has produced nasty vegans trying to destroy not only business, but also Quebec's sense of pride and culture, even globally by participating in the fight for the global ban on seal products, for example. That's the ultimate sellout in some way. So for many, new cultural invention is to reclaim the innocence of a past when human exceptionalism was unquestioned, when everything in the cosmos had its place. Besides, very simply put, globalization is also threatening to some, as it has also brought those scary-looking hijabs and kippas. And I believe that historian Pierre Norat's work on the phenomenon of the lieu of de mémoire in the context of the disintegration of the rural world in France, so I'm drawing on his work, is applicable. The construction of a site of memory as a way groups deal with unsettling and disturbing historical memory that include rupture, such as the disintegration of identity. It appears that, for example, the new rodeo, la fête agricole, and the whole framing of the countryside, of la patrimoine rural, are such lieux de mémoire, serving as artificial sites, events, spectacles of memory shaping emotion, sense of bonding, and identity of participants. So either you play the game or you're out. Parallel to this, as we're talking about the culturalist system of identification in Quebec, I want to refer to Bill 60, or Charter of Values. I'm sure that most of you have heard of it. Working to construct a secular Quebec while officially claiming religious neutrality and gender equality as almost quintessential Quebec values, as if we had invented these in some way. I sometimes have this impression. So what this implies, among many other things, is that public sector employees are not to wear any conspicuous religious symbols. This constructs kippas and hijabs as religious and not cultural. This is religious, this is not rational. While the crucifix, for example, in the National Assembly is constructed as cultural in another lieu de mémoire, a site where a problematic history, Catholic history, is being negotiated, but in a way that is safely controlled and fixed in place. It's on the wall, right? These items offer some kind of meaningful connection with this painful history. 2 more pages to go. And similar attempts are made actually with focus on churches and other religious buildings, Catholic buildings that are reinterpreted now as culture. and thus not threatening to the secular paradigm. Okay. And these sites of memory I consider very similar to the ritualized enactments of human supremacy via the rodeo, for example, those famous pig festivals. So the reconfiguration of a Catholic heritage that is, God forbid, not religious but cultural, alongside an understanding of agribusiness as tradition, translates the ideal citizen as someone who does not wear a hijab, wears fur, eats pig flesh and lots of it, and is no spoil sport when it comes to hunting, fishing, and rodeo. Of course, including other activities. So the ideal citizen also buys into the humane slaughter myth. Animal welfare is almost as sacred as gender equality. Maybe they're understood, as I mentioned, as quintessential Quebec values, so much so that successfully stunning every other cow or less before her throat is ripped open is seen as civilized or normal, while halal and kosher methods that have no such pretensions is called barbarity, even though we know, as I mentioned, stunning doesn't work. So this is really just a false dichotomy here. So how to think of culture differently? The social sciences already have the tools, many tools, to consider culture as unbounded, contested, and connected to relations of power, as the product of historical influences rather than evolutionary change or deterministic. To examine a particular, oh my gosh, really? Oh my gosh.
Can you step a little bit?
Yes,
yeah.
Okay. So where am I? So to examine a particular practice of animal use as part of a system that, as any institution seeks to reproduce itself, might be helpful at analyzing the mechanism of its perpetuation. Yet the question remains whether the use of this politically loaded concept is useful. By reifying an abstraction and culture, the culture concept is an abstraction, of course. We're reinforcing our assumptions rather than confronting them with the convention-defying actions of real people. Now, I wanted to get into fancy theories of Pierre Bourdieu, which I will skip. And I'd like to just get to the end there. To really focus, to understand, of course, to understand that it's not some abstract cultural system that does things to animals. It is people, and that the acceptance of culture as analytical category may shift the attention away from those that are really responsible. It is individuals that make use of such practices to rationalize their way of life, aestheticize, and make science of the lives they lead. And therefore, I believe that arguing that a certain cultural practice is inauthentic or outdated is not sufficient. So I believe that a critical analysis of public discourse, destabilizing the new dogma on Quebec culture as a whole, is needed. And one that is sensitive to post-colonial theory, understands the psychology of globalization, that might produce data that can offer resistance to the ways practices of exclusion and oppression are valorized and rationalized. So in the paper, well, in the middle part that I'm not going to read, I also get into insights used by developmental psychologists who talk about the way that the culture is not something that we well, it is something that we reconstruct in our daily activities, and thus can change. It's very difficult to summarize in this sentence. I hope this made sense. Thank you. I hope this made sense. I left out a lot now. So, yeah. Any questions? Yes.
Maybe just a bit more of a comment, but you might be interested. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Irshad Manji, but she really has an interesting critique of the Canadian multicultural.
I don't have a pen, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sort of personal identity that the country has, and it's interesting because it's a lot like what you say. She criticizes the idea that if you consider a culture as beyond, like you shouldn't criticize a culture. You have to keep in mind that what you have an idea of as a culture may only represent a small percentage of the population. Like she's using certain religious examples where they have examples of whether they have to have a beard or whether they have to have certain garments. but that may not necessarily reflect the views of all the people who supposedly come from that culture. So it kind of reminded me of some of the things you were saying. I just thought you might find that interesting.
Thank you very much. Yes. And I'm arguing that in some cases it might be very useful to do a so-called bottom-up induction approach, that you step back and actually look at this instance of ritualized animal use, and you actually look at what the person is doing. Don't put the label culture right there. It's too politically loaded. So I think then we can defamiliarize ourselves from these practices and really look at what's happening. So thank you very much. I will write down.
Thank you. Yeah.
Citation. Yes.
I think we just had an example of this during last night's dinner. There was a guy passing by, and at that moment we were saying, we're giving our message in English. So he immediately rejected it. And then he kept walking, but someone tried to talk to him in French and everything, but for him it was worthless, and he threw the paper that was given to him, the garbage. So it's like they put a label over, or maybe they just cover up themselves, and if it's not Quebecois enough, then I think your message is that will not take some of my time.
Mm-hmm. So we're struggling with this on a daily basis, right? And as activists.
Yes, and we just had an example.
What's
like
the question?
always we have to have that kind of situation, like this cultural clash. Every time we're trying to give our voice to animals, regardless of being in French or English, we're always like the linguistic.
Could you speak up a little bit?
The linguistic problem always comes up.
But you're saying it's a culture class.
As a
It's
cultural
more
class.
than just a language barrier or language politics.
You just explained it's like a cultural thing, more than a linguistic thing,
Mm-hmm,
right?
mm-hmm. She was just sharing a personal experience as an activist. Okay.
What's the difference? What's the difference really between let's say the murder of non-human animals in Quebec and other places? It all seems the same, basically. No, I mean I know you were talking specifically about Quebec, but is it really different in any fundamental ways from any other place on the planet?
My point was actually that it's being justified differently. The way we justify these practices are culturally contextualized. The language we use, the metaphors we use. Here it is tradition. For example, in the German context, that's another context I'm more familiar with. Germans don't tend to necessarily base their identity on food. You can definitely go to Bavaria and go to the beer fest there, the Oktoberfest, and have vegan beer and eat tofu, and nobody will question you. The justification of animal exploitation, for example, in Germany, works differently, and that's actually my point. The difference is yes.
So, I'm francophone Québécoise, grew up on the farm, I totally understand.
Plus fort, parle plus fort.
Yeah, thanks.
Right, so it's very interesting talk because I'm, francophone Québécoise, I grew up on a farm in rural Quebec, and, I'm here to organize this conference, so just so you guys know where I'm coming from and where I am now. And I'm questioning, I'm trying to think, like, do you see that we could, because I know that you're trying to walk away from this use of tradition, but do you think there could be some other traditional kind of tools that we could use to reverse the point, right? Like to say, like, this does not represent Quebecois culture to abuse, to use, and do you see that this would be problematic? Like, do you want to walk away from any type of like appeal to tradition or culture, or only the ones that are negative?
Actually, in part of, I'm actually making the point that there are spaces and cracks, because drawing from Pierre, maybe I can just mention that his understanding of the dialectical relationship between individual agents, the habitus, and the contextual environment of the field. So he says that it's embodying social structures, and we reproduce them in preferences, tastes, actions for future embodiment, and these are not rational choices. So he also talks about the necessity of keeping this going, to justify and re-justifying it. So there are spaces, because of all this paradox and all these tensions and all these contradictions. But I'd like to also say that you really took a risk. I know several people that left their families behind. They are not welcome at home anymore. Their families are involved in the agribusiness, for example, in the dairy industry, and you are paying a high price.
Well, I mean, I paid it on my own because right now I'm like kind of alienated from my family and they just do business as usual. But you know, that's where it starts. So it would be interesting to be able to point to them some key ideas that kind of that conflict with their own identity and the actions that they're taking that maybe they fail to see, because I fail to have tools to actually engage in a useful discussion with my family, which is kind of sad because it's my family. But like, yeah.
What role does religion play in your family? Because not at all. Okay, so what? And okay.
But yeah.
Just to answer this, so what I'm doing in my own work, actually at the PhD level, is looking at the Jewish religion, at the Jewish many different traditions, and looking at all these vegan resources that are there. I believe because these meanings are contested in every group, because people are not mindless, there's this contestation going on within the group, that there are these resources available. And I think that cultural studies, religion studies, anthropology can do excellent work recovering these resources. Thank you so much.
Okay, next we have Anne-Sophie Cardinal. On community development. She worked on the issue of African refugees and asylum seekers and human rights violations in Israel, and she worked in sub-Saharan Africa with vulnerable children and orphans. She's also the co-founder of an organization assisting orphans in Kenya named Become, which I'll write the web address for on the board.
Je sais pas si tu veux utiliser le micro. Ah, okay. Si tu peux juste le mettre dans ton cou, ou on peut le tester avant si tu veux. Là. Okay. Tu veux-tu? Moi, je trouve que j'aime ça quand les gens l'utilisent, là, mais tu vois comment, si t'es à l'aise avec. Faut pas que je bouge, hein? Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien? 1, 2, 1, 2. Oui? OK. C'est bon? Ça, tu peux utiliser la manette si tu veux. Pas de problème. Ou bien comme ça. Pour le temps? Oui, c'est ça. Rocky? After how many minutes do you show that? Yeah, but how long do you... Isaac, can we dim the light a little bit? Is it possible? Or? Just a little bit, please. Not this one? Okay. Yeah, just because I have a lot of visuals and it would be nice to see it well.
We can see the screen pretty well.
Okay, so never mind, that's fine, I think. Yeah. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm very happy, thanks for inviting me here, and I'm a little bit louder. I'm very glad to have the chance to share my experience. I'm not typically from like many of you, from the field of critical animal studies. I'll explain a little bit. Now, I know my topic is, or can be, we can take it as far or as not far as we want, can be quite controversial. Israel is quite infamous for animal, also, but human rights violations because of the long-standing conflict there. So I'm, here to share you, to give a little bit of an overview, to give you a snapshot of the vegan revolution happening there. I'll explain what that involves. But I just want to start by making a little disclaimer, if I can, that even though I spent 6 years there, my connection with Israel is quite accidental. As you know, I'm married to Ziv, which is, who is from Israel, but just happened to be there quite by chance, and I ended up doing my master's in international and community development. So I'm working with injustices to people, and along the way with the vegan revolution in Israel, found myself to become vegan, and Ziv as well, and we got involved there with activists. But it's a very complicated context, and we cannot unpack, it's impossible to unpack all the issues of that country. So I'm just here to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what's happening in terms of the vegan revolution. I'll give you can hear me well, yeah? So this is the beach in Tel Aviv. I'll show you a map. We all want to be there now with the snow outside. It's quite a liberal place, Tel Aviv. So that's downtown Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean Sea. Brief outline, I'll talk about the current situation, trends in restaurants, I'll talk about organizations and protests, and some brief thoughts, initial explanations that I thought about why it's happening in Israel. I also want to say that, so my work, just in a nutshell, with injustices to people there has been focusing on injustices to African asylum seekers and refugees, but they're not recognized as refugees, in Israel. So they walk typically from Africa across the border with the Sinai desert with Egypt, and go online, check it out. It's gruesome. There are so many. I went to immigration prisons, and it's horrible, that issue. So that's kind of the work I did. And I also do work with vulnerable children in sub-Saharan Africa, orphans. And the photographs I'm using, I have to say, some of them are mine, but most of them are from active stills. Look them up. They're a group of photographers, wonderful photographers, that are documenting all kinds of injustices to people and also to animals. So there is a connection there, obviously. So they give me the right to use for the purpose of the conference only. Also the group 269 Life I'm using for non-commercial use. So that's it. So let's start. I'm going to start with showing you a video. I hope it works. I want to give you a little bit of a feeling of what's happening there. This is a demonstration that Ziv and I went. I cried right when it started because it was extremely moving to be surrounded by 5,000 people that want justice for animals. It was absolutely beautiful. Let's hope that it works. The sound should be, let's see. Okay. Hope. Do we have sound for this as well?
No, did you plug it in? There should be a cable for it somewhere.
Okay. Apologies for the technical.
There.
This one?
It was possible to hear it already.
Yeah, okay. I will just, let's try this.
No, it'll be too loud.
Too loud? Okay. Sorry, one moment. It's in Hebrew anyway, so for those who speak Hebrew, let's try it. Okay, so the animal rights demonstration last August. Yeah, excellent. This is downtown Tel Aviv. A lot of people. Just keep coming, more people. This is from an organization that is against lab experiments and trying to liberate chimps from labs. This was, you might have seen this, so like, you know, they were blindfolded and then remove it, opening your eyes to being conscious, opening your hearts. This is the end point of the demonstration. That's the end. So that's quite it's impressive, right? I mean, that's why I was very moved being there. Quite amazing. Can we see well? Yeah, great. So we talk a lot, we hear a lot about Israel. I want to put it back a little bit, you know, just to put it on the map. So we have the Mediterranean Sea there. You see the West Bank, Gaza, just to keep in mind. Palestine is there, Egypt, Jordan, Syria. So that's the whole. The population just hit 8 million, so it's a country with 8 million people. Now, if we're talking about the vegan revolution, the current situation happening, so there is a problem with finding data because it's also a very recent social change, so it's difficult to find data, but there is an institute that did very recently, last month. So these are the numbers that I found. So there would be, it's thought that there is 1 million people in Israel, 13% of the population considers themselves to be either vegetarian or vegan, 5% of them in the last year alone, so it's moving fast. 13% of the population, we don't know how big was the sample, but people think it's a few hundred, so is that, yeah. So 13% would be considering to become vegetarian or vegan, especially strong data with the younger population. And then 14% have a friend who became vegetarian in the last year, 12%, okay, that's also interesting. This is lovely food, vegan food from Moshav, so basically a kibbutz style, a different style of village in Israel. They claim to be the only vegetarian village in, we don't think of India, of course, but the only vegetarian village in the world, founded in the Galil, in the north of the country, in the 50s. So Ziv and I went to eat there. It's quite wonderful. To this day, right now, but there's new ones every week, every month, all the time being added. There are 200 restaurants all over the country with at least 1/4, so 25% of the menu being vegan. Some of them are strictly vegan, but they're all together. 80 or 90 of them, so about a little bit less than half, are concentrated in Tel Aviv alone. This is where the movement started. There is a chef and food critic. Her name is Ori Shavit. She is very important in the movement. She's very positive and using educational ways to change people's minds. She's veganizing restaurants. So she will do like workshop with chefs, her friends, or people that own restaurants, and going to work with them. And she's helping them to incorporate vegan meals into the menu. She also has a blog, different blogs for recipes, of course. She has a blog called Vegan Girls Have More Fun, or Vegans on Top. So it's quite dynamic and interesting. And yeah, so she's a public figure. There's also singers that are taking a stand, and so there's different famous people that are showing that they're vegan. Speaking about vegan-friendly restaurants, there's the vegan-friendly website, and it's also a logo. This is the logo. What it is, it's an organization. It's also their logo is used. So all these restaurants, the 200 restaurants, they have this logo in their window. So if you walk around the city and you see the logo, you know that you can eat there. It's friendly for you as a vegan. So she's helping vegan-friendly as well, the organization. So it's important to point out a little bit the consumption and trends that are happening. So it's in Hebrew, I'll translate. So first of all, again, the problem of data, but Globes is the biggest economy journal or newspaper in Israel. It's from December, so just a few months ago. They looked at the month of November alone, and the demand, so at the top you have the milk products, dairy products altogether. The demand for it was reduced by 2.4%. And then looking into details of each product, we have the first one on the top is milk, so fresh milk. The second one, 7% reduction was yogurt. Then you have 5.1% was cheeses. And the last one is cottage cheese, reduced by 4.2%. I think it was for, yeah, that's a good question. They said it was for looking at a snapshot of November, but maybe Ziv has more.
Just the month of November.
So compared to what, last year or October?
Yes.
So November 2020.
Yeah, 2013 versus.
But it's a good question. Okay, it's also, I want to point out, Tnuva is the biggest dairy company in Israel. They are introducing new products, a couple. They have a series of soya milk, vanilla flavor, all sorts. And they also introduced a few months ago the red, you see Chadash, that means new on the right, the small sign. It's a new yogurt, soya, a series of soya yogurts. Of course, some activists and vegans are against because they're dairy company, but I just wanted to share that they are also trying to move on to the wave of changing. They're changing their products because they want to reach the niche market. There's also chain restaurants like Greg. The marketing manager was saying that 30% to 40% of the demand for vegan dishes. So there is a rise in the demand as well. Domino's Pizza, the first place in the world where Domino's Pizza is offering a vegan option, is in Israel. So considering they have 48 branches, it's quite wonderful. Again, the niche market there. And I want to point out that it's the vegan pizza in Domino's in Israel is 5 shekel more, so equivalent to $1.25. So it's not so much. So it's not. Sometimes it's known that, or people think that vegan food is more expensive. So here, not really the case. There's also a restaurant called Vegetarian Shawarma. They've been around for several years. And the last one is Aroma Coffee Shops, the equivalent of like Starbucks there. They have 117 branches. And you remember I talked to you about Ori Shavit, the chef and critic. So she is also working, for example, another action. The classic, can I have a soy latte? Yeah, but you'll pay $1 extra. So she contributed all of Aroma Coffees, don't charge anymore for additional. So that's another action that she's doing in the background. Okay, the third point would be to talk about the various animal groups. So the first one is that there's 3 million street cats in Israel. They're everywhere, and it's quite great, but yeah, it's another issue altogether. But there are many organizations for street animals doing great work. Veterinary services is quite cheap in Israel. So, for example, we were feeding 20 cats when we were living there every night, and we took many of them to the vet because you can do it. It's not as expensive as here, so that was quite good. So there are many, animals, organizations for street cats. I'm going to name just the most prominent. So Let Live, Anonymous, Animal Liberation Front, Behind Lab Doors, led by Anat Refoua. She is an important activist. They have won several battles. Ziv did some work a little bit with them, but so she is fighting very hard to close farms with chimpanzees, and I think they succeeded. Just this year, the chimps are not being used for the purposes, but they're still in the farm, but waiting to find an alternative solution for the forever home, you know, so. And then the 269 Life. So I'm going to talk about them because they originated from Israel, not because I absolutely support everything they do. Very controversial organization. We can try to talk about that together after. Some of the images I will show are, you know, it's extreme activism, so they can be, they are graphic, so I want to tell you before. So this is 269. When you go to the website of 269, the original one, it was a calf that the founder, Sasha Boujar, met in a farm in Israel. And on the website, this is how it's explained, that he was born in Israel, his life, and then you have cross off, will be cut off not long after it started. And then they cross it off and they say his life was saved near his scheduled slaughter day. He is well and alive in an undisclosed location. It's secret, because they did this illegally. But so that's the original 269. They did branding. This is again from the website. I'm going to read. By branding his number of the calf on our bodies, we show our solidarity with the victims of the animal holocaust all around the world, remembering not to forget. And also, so there have been a few of branding happening. One of the first ones was, or probably, I think the first one was October 2012 on World Farm Animals Day in Rabin Square, Kikar Rabin, in the center of Tel Aviv. So different animal activists, they say they performed an act of solidarity and empathy towards abused animals exploited by the human race. So I'm going to show you a few images of that. So you have branding there. I found on an article, this is the founder, so he said while experiencing this, what was really unpleasant is the sensation, a feeling, excuse me, of the skin being turned off, and you can smell the flesh burning, you feel out of control, and it's easy to understand how animals feel when they are in that situation. So again, some tattooing, very moving experience. This is photos from the 269 Life website. And now the movement has evolved to Brazil, Canada, United States, France, so it's evolved in many ways. So yesterday we had Casey Offret, who talked about her, experience as an artist, her work, she put herself in a cage, so you can look it up in the streams later, but it reminded me of your work. So this is again very central Tel Aviv for hours and hours. Of course, arrests are happening all the time and being released, and it's a constant battle. Okay, so one of the controversial works, this is a calf. Well, he's dead. So they used him. They did two things. One of them was to display on a plate, as you see, with a fork and knife. Again, very central Tel Aviv, where a lot of passerbys, so people could see. And what does it say here, Ziv, on the banner? Removing the cruelty of your plate. Yeah, I can read Hebrew, but very slowly. So, and another thing they did was later they reused the animal to stage slaughtering, like live public slaughtering. So quite controversial. In the end, they buried the animal in a field in a respectful way. So yeah, a lot to talk about. Yeah, so. Chain to here, we see activists chained to, this is a chicken farm. I think it's a transportation facility, so a lot of arrests. This is a mother of a few children. She had her shoulder dislocated, arm broken, very violent. On the this says die, means stop. Well, also means die in English, kind of funny, but yeah, so very graphic images. The next one, maybe you may want to close your eyes. So they used the head of a sheep to put in a water fountain. The liquid in the fountain is not blood. 2 minutes left. Oh my God. Okay, it's color in the water. in front of butchery shops. They did all kinds of, again, arrests. Graffitis. Dairy products, cruel separation of mother and baby, choose veganism. Can I have a few more minutes? Just yeah? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So now we're coming to possible explanations. Why in Israel? As you saw, it happened really fast. So why? I don't have all the answers, but I have some initial thoughts. We had a great talk about culture and religion. You're there. So just to say that, you know, in the Judeo-Christian tradition, we had authorization from God. It was explicitly granted to men to consume animals. So in the Torah, in the Old Testament, we can read, everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I give you the green plants, I now give you everything. And also, you shall not boil a kid from his mother's milk. This is where kashrut comes from, kasher. So from that, an association was derived, interpretation was done not to mix milk with meat, and also the distinction between pure animals that are edible and non-edible, inedible animals, such as pigs, for example. This is a whole lecture in itself, but I'm going to move on from that. This is a picture of a farm that we saw. I want to stress that the legal background, and there have been bans in Israel. For example, foie gras was banned already, in 2006. It's especially important because in the 90s, Israel was the third largest exporter of foie gras after France and Hungary. So the fact that they banned it was, quite interesting. There is, like many other countries, animal testing. The work of the organization with Anat Refoua and behind lab doors. Chavat Mazor is the Mazor farm, so that's the chimpanzee work she's doing. El Al company is the equivalent of Air Canada here. They've stated that they're not transporting lab animals anymore. So that's also a wonderful stand. Cosmetics, if you buy a product from Israel, you can know that it's not been tested on animals. And then fur, so fur, I thought it was already approved, but it's on the way to being approved. There is a bill proposed in July 2012 to ban any fur strictly used for fashion purposes. So, for example, various streams of the Orthodox Jewish, so you have streimels that are being used. And in a recent opinion poll by Anti-Fur Coalition and Let Animals Live, there would be 80% of Israelis that believe that killing animals to use their fur is morally wrong, and 70% would support a nationwide ban. So there's that. Remember I showed you the map of Israel? Well, could it be that maybe Tel Aviv? Well, because the movement started in Tel Aviv. So let's look at Tel Aviv. It's in the middle. It's part of a central coastal area of Israel called Gush Dan, and which includes 42% of the population. So, and in Israel, everybody knows each other. Even me, I'm a foreigner, and after a few years, I could, it's all very connected. So, if it started there, potentially 40% of the population in the area could be reached. Another demographic element is the age group. So, this is the population, very young population. We're talking about a little bit over 40% of the population that is below 30 years old. And then 65% up to 44 years old. So that's also another element. Young people having fun in Tel Aviv. Okay, another element is the Mediterranean diet. So all the food in Israel, I cannot say all, but most of the food is locally grown and fresh food, so you have a lot of olives, a lot of, different cereal, fruit, vegetables, a lot of the staple food. So, for example, falafel, hummus, it's Middle Eastern, but Israel has also adapted these Middle Eastern staple food, so it was already vegan, so everybody eats those things anyway, so it was familiar. Okay, does anybody know what this image is? This is the wall separating. This is in Bethlehem, in the I went there a few times, and this is the wall of separation between Israel and Palestine. So I called something called a conflict element. It's a shame we don't have a lot of time, but I think that the fact that Israel is having a conflict for over 60 years, the young people of Israel, I don't know, when I got there, I did not get involved with Palestinians. Of course, I boycott certain products from, the settlements. I'm anti-occupation. I have many friends that are involved with Palestinians. All these things, and I'm not, but when I got there, it felt way too overwhelming to get involved with that issue, especially not being from there. And yeah, it's very complex, but it was easier for me, more approachable for me to get involved with African asylum seekers, for example. It seemed more easy for me to understand, somehow was more approachable. So I'm thinking that maybe, because it's mandatory for boys in Israel for 3 years to do the army, and for girls 2 years. So could it be that maybe the animal rights issue is more approachable to them than trying to solve something they were part of and something that their grandparents were involved in? I don't know. Just an initial thought. On that note, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, last year, they're using vegan boots. So they banned the use of boots made of leather, but it's a crazy signal because the boots of soldiers, so it's like, an injustice of human, and then you have injustice of animals. But it is just quite interesting, I thought. We have Bibi, Benjamin Netanyahu. He was quoted recently having said that him and his wife and family, they've been reducing the intake of meat and dairy, and that he's more aware of animal suffering. The Knesset, the government of Israel, on last year's Animals Rights Day, they had a whole day about animal rights. Ori Shavit was cooking for them, the chef. So that was quite interesting that in the government sphere, there's something happening. So yeah, I'm thinking maybe frustration from, and anger from being part of the army or being exposed all the time to the conflict. Maybe it makes people more, something they can fight against on their daily plate, right? So maybe that's an easier thing. And then I guess in conclusion, I can tell you a little bit what could be another trigger. Two young men, I forgot their name, I'm sorry, but they saw the Gary Yourofsky lecture. So the Gary Yourofsky lecture, they put Hebrew subtitles to his lecture, the American activist. There's almost 2 million views here in Hebrew. So who speaks Hebrew in the world? Well, the diaspora, of course, but mostly Israeli. So the fact that there's 25% potentially of the population that watch this says a lot. And so it was disseminated online in all kinds of platforms. They did tours around, like they did the projection. So Israel is, one of the sectors of Israel is the high-tech industry. They invented USB drives, for example. So it's called the land of startups, Israel. So maybe because of the social media element, maybe that's how the tone of the lecture is thought to really speak to the... For anybody who's been to Israel will understand what the Israel attitude is. I don't mean politically, but I mean the nonchalant and the very honest, like you really know what people think, for better and worse. But the fact that the terminology that Gary is using, for example, calling honey bee vomit or calling eggs chicken periods, well, it is, he's really pointing out honestly what things are. So maybe that's what people relate. Maybe the Israeli people feel that he's using things, he's not masking things. He was recently in Israel. His first ever visit outside of the US was, in Israel. And I have to read you very quickly something that he said while there, because it's quite incredible. People asked him the question, why help animals and not Palestinians, and this whole debate that we talked about. So he answered, because he was speaking in Ariel, which is one of the important settlements in the West Bank. So he was saying, since the international community is comprised of violence, violent, bloodthirsty thugs who terrorize billions of innocent animals every second of every minute of every hour of every day, the international community can go to hell. When people start eating sliced up Jew flesh and seared Palestinian children in between 2 slices of bread with onions, pickles and mustard, then I'll be concerned with the Middle East situation. So that's it. They also, those 2 guys, they also founded Gary TV. They did lecture tours. And the national TV of Israel presented, you know, the undercover investigations of farm animals, specifically, if I remember wrong, about the egg industry. So the fact that national TV is on board is quite wonderful. And that's kind of as a conclusion, I wanted to say also that, as I said, Israel is very complex. I'm reading now just from 972. If you have any interest in Israel, go look at Plus 972. It's a left-wing anti-occupation. They work with active stills, the photographers, activists. It's an online journal, magazine, writers, journalists. So here they are explaining that Eyal Gross from Haaretz, a professor in international law and a vegan as well, he is kind of saying that we should exercise caution. So I should exercise caution when talking to you guys about the vegan revolution in Israel, not to use this because, you know, there's 15% of the population in Tel Aviv is gay. So there's it's a gay tourism destination. So he's saying that that's the kind of issues we shouldn't use to promote Israel, to do, like he calls it, pink washing, like vegan washing, like to use veganism, the revolution, to portray Israel in a better way. We can agree with that or not, but he's saying that like when we talk about progressive LGBT legislation and gay tourism and vegan revolution, we can talk about it, but let's not forget the gruesome human rights violations as well. So that's my conclusion.
It was a fantastic talk. I don't think you'll be surprised by a couple of comments, and I'm sure it won't be made for the first time. First of all, I don't think there's anybody in this room who will not agree that, what is it called, 259?
269,
the
yeah.
269 killing of an animal for this purpose is an abomination, and it's on the other side of the fence.
They didn't kill it. They did not kill it. They took it from a farm. A farm gave them, right? And they, yeah.
They took him
but
away
still
temporarily and then returned him to be killed.
Can you explain
No,
it?
he was dead. He was dead already. It's. Have you seen the?
What was in that picture of him beside the?
He was already dead. So they,
already dead.
yeah.
Okay.
But still, we can talk about, you know,
Okay,
using an animal. But no, they did not kill him.
It's a misunderstanding.
Igualdad Animal from Spain does the same thing. I don't know if you've
Right.
seen it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I agree that with a dead animal's cadaver, what you do is, I'm not religious, what you do for the causes.
Okay.
So that's not.
Sorry, it wasn't clear.
That was worrisome.
Yeah.
The other thing is a question about correlation. Do you think that because Gary Yourofsky is another issue, and not quite as bad as that. Do you think that the strong showing in veganism in Israel is a causal consequence of Gary Yourofsky type tactics, or are these 2 million views of Gary Yourofsky just an effect of whatever it is that really made Israelis the way they are?
Yeah.
Because correlation doesn't mean causation.
I don't know, because I know that in 2011, when they started showing the video, it just went viral.
That's
and
just video watching.
Yeah.
The question is that a cause of veganism or an effect of veganism?
Right, but I don't know. I really don't know. But when we talk to friends and different family members, actually, and I can say, you know, many of them, almost most of them, saw the lecture, and that was their trigger. That's yeah. Almost everybody you talk to, you know, and even the animal rights groups, so many popped up after 2011. All of a sudden, people saw the lecture, and But I don't know. I don't have a good answer.
Yeah. My only comment about, first of all, what is the correlation between veganism and activism for other humane causes? I assume it's very high. I assume that vegans are more likely to be pro-Palestinian.
Well, so it's very interesting because I thought yes, but in my master's, so community development, social change, and all of that. We were a class of 20 in Jerusalem. Half of them were vegan or vegetarian, but mostly vegan, and all of those guys were working with Palestinians. So there is, definitely, but there are also, there's somebody called Avikuzi, right? He is an animal, he is very pro-occupation. This is our land, Israel is my home, and who are you, and he's very, very extreme right-wing, but he will, we called him once to catch a cat because we were trying to get her to the vet, and so we called Avikuzi with his cages that came, and he will put his life before any animal. He's one of the most prominent activists in Israel today, but he's very right-wing. So I think, in Israel we say there's one issue, 300 opinions. So, but there are also vegans that are pro-occupation, I think. But, and there's also anti-occupation people that are helping Palestinians rebuild farms that were destroyed by the army. What does that make them, right? They're fighting injustices against, against the IDF to have Palestinians, but they're eating meat and they're all kinds of things happening at the same time. I hope I answered.
When I ask English, really understand. I think we should advertise during the Montreal Vegan Festival in the fall, so we can have a discussion and compare what can be done in Quebec and what has been done in Israel.
Sure.
I mean, the population is almost the same in numbers. Quebec population is a lot older, so that might be an issue. And the religion is quite different. We are not used to make sacrifice, not eating things for moral reasons. So it will be interesting to have a broad discussion. But I had, so in the fall for in French that time.
Yeah.
But I had just two questions on the facts. The first one, how did the media react, like the large media in Israel, to those protests and stuff like that?
The 5,000 people protest, the activists said there was 6,000, and some media said there was 3,000. Then the consensus was that there was 5,000 people. I think they were on board quite. They were interested in the phenomenon, so they are reporting. Plus 972, they're reporting about animal activism all the time. National TV was presenting different things. I don't know, maybe Ziv, you can add something.
Yeah, one of the major reporters in Israel once.
We can't hear you very well. Ziv, we can't hear you very well.
I said that one of the major reporters in Israel, the one that gives the news every day, she became vegan as well.
Right.
There were all these reports that brought them from the undercover walks that they're presented almost on a weekly basis, different kind of things. So I would say the Israeli media is really on board.
That's amazing.
Except for when Gary came to Israel. He basically pushed a journalist who was wearing leather. So that was very controversial, and of course everything he says can be, it's quite controversial. So so the media followed. It was very covered, his tour. So. Oh, I have to stop? Okay.
How big is the meat producing industry in Israel, like meat, dairy, and eggs? Is it, do you import a lot?
No, it's mostly local, right? The meat and dairy, local. I don't have numbers to give you, I'm sorry, but almost no importation, I think. Yeah, except for lamb from Australia. There's a lot. We have time for more? No? Okay. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you all. That's the conclusion of the morning, but I do have a couple of quick things to say before we get